Well, hello.
Hi, friend.
Hi. I love that you are so into our music. We're so gifted.
I am dialed in to our intro, and I like to bop
Yes.
along in the outro too. Um,
Hmm.
so, Jen, let's before we get too far into it, we're trying to get into the habit and practice of introducing ourselves
Already forgot.
before we dive into an episode of Unscripted with Ali and Jen.
Yes.
So let's do that. Let's introduce ourselves like good hosts. Jen, where are you in the world? What are you doing? What's happening over here?
Fantastic. Thank you. I had already forgotten that that was what we agreed to last month. So yes, yes, I'm Jen Grace. I am the founder of Publisher Purpose and the Institute for Author Growth and Impact, and I help authors primarily through the hybrid publishing journey, occasionally on the writing side, and then certainly on the marketing side as well. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot more I could say, but we'll get into all the details as we go. So,
Yeah.
Allie, over to
Oh,
you.
I'm just going to add two very important things. Jen is an award-winning author herself of several books. How many are you up to at this point?
8. I'm actually working on my ninth now, hoping to have it out in October.
Okay. And Jen also recently launched the Author Growth and Impact Institute,
Yes.
AGI, which has three different schools in it. And so, folks, you're going to want to go and find out more about that. Um, Jen, you want to throw the link up in a banner?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then you can also add, if that's not in our show notes already, we should add that to the show notes.
It probably isn't. And yes, it is authorgrowthandimpact.org.
Awesome. And I'm Allie. I'm the other half of this unscripted shindig. I run The Right Place, Right Time. I am a developmental editor and book coach with a specialty in memoir. Also, an award winning author myself. I have two award winning books. One's a memoir and one is a writing reference. Both I'm very proud of. And what else is there to say? I think that kind of is it in a nutshell. I mean, there's lots of other things about me, but that's
Yeah,
all you need to know for the sake of today's conversation.
fairly put.
Fairly put.
All right.
Okay, so folks, this season of Unscripted with Ali and Jen has been all about promotion and marketing, hence why it's called the promotion season. And we have been following along with Jen's latest book, Promote Your Purpose, which is in her background there, but I will hold up a copy of it so that it's a little bit more visible. And we've been biting off one chapter a month, essentially turning Unscripted into a small book club with me as a case study and guinea pig as an author, working through the material in the book because the book is extremely accessible. Here's the great thing. You don't have to have the book in order to follow along with Unscripted. We did the really cool thing of putting together our very first website, unscriptedforauthors.com, where you can actually go and access a free downloadable workbook that goes along and follows along with everything we've been talking about month to month. And now we are here in month 8
8.
already.
Mhm.
And so, in keeping with that, we are in the chapter 8 of this fabulous book. But before we dive into chapter 8, which is strategizing your visibility and audience growth, and starts to work through the first element of the ASPEN method, Jen, why don't we just cover what we've talked about in previous episodes, just like high level topics, so that anybody joining us new understands just where we have been in 2026.
Yes. So we have taken quite the tour this year. So we've started off really in the beginning couple of months this year, which is the beginning parts of the book, obviously, around kind of identifying our purpose, our vision, our impact, our target audience, what our ecosystem for our book looks like, how it integrates with our with all the things and how we're showing up in the world. And then last month we talked about sales and trying to reframe how do we think about sales coming from a lens of service versus coming from a place that kind of just feels icky and gross. And so now, as we're entering month 8 through the rest of this year, we're actually getting into the ASPEN method. And the A in ASPEN is assess, as you had said. And so really the next kind of 5 months will kind of give us, I always kind of think of it as like a something cyclical, almost like a cycle where we can kind of move our way through all the phases of the ASPEN method. And then once we hit the end, we can kind of just start back over and start assessing all over again. And so we'll kind of get into the weeds and the details as relevant throughout this. But yeah, so at this point, if you've been following along, you should have a really good concrete foundation set. That's really what the first seven months have been, of like setting our foundation, because now we kind of know the who, what, where, when, why, how. Actually, the who, what, where, when. Now we're kind of figuring out the how and like, what does this actually look like? So I'm excited for this part. I've been waiting for it.
And I actually want to correct, I misspoke. I gave people chapter 9's title, but said it was chapter 8. And that's because that's where my bookmark is, because that's the next chapter I have to read. So we're at chapter 8, assess, which is an A word to go with the first letter of Aspen. Assess your platform, purpose, and possibilities. So today we're going to talk about the Aspen Method. Specifically the first part of that, but I think we should probably give our people a high overview of like what the ASPEN actually stands for. And we're kind of dive into that, but I wanted to kind of just preface this whole conversation with a few higher level things. First, number one, Rome wasn't built in a day. So, and I think we've probably said that or some version of that 1,000 times in the first 7 months. So as we dive in today with what A stands for, you know, the assessing phase, we're not here to overwhelm people. We're here to give people tools and information to help them make their best informed decision or take their best next step. And this can be a slow boil or a slow roll. Like we're not asking you to go out and slay dragons and do all the things right out of the gate. So slow and steady can win the race. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I really want to encourage you to first start with what's already available to you. So as we start talking about assessing where you are, what you've been doing, what the opportunities might be for going elsewhere to promote and market, I really want to emphasize that, like, use skills and tools that you already have at your disposal, that you're already comfortable with. There's no reason necessarily to have to start by going after new things that you've never interfaced with, getting new skills, training, going down the rabbit hole, or even spending a ton of money on new things that you think are going to be some sort of magic pill that's going to make all of this easier, faster, more efficient. So those are two of the kind of fundamental things that I wanted to kind of outline. The third is to not lose sight of yourself. So a lot of the upfront work that we've talked about in the last 7 episodes, right, has really been like, don't forget your values. Don't forget what you like to do. Don't forget how you like to create and engage with content. Yes, you need to think about your reader. Yes, you need to think about your book's message. Those are important parts of this puzzle as well. But if you are unhappy doing any of the things, then it's going to come out in that energy of promotion and sale, and you're going to hate it, and it's not going to feel authentic, and it's probably not going to attract your ideal result. So slow and steady, use what you've got. Remember who you are in the equation.
It's a great way to anchor everything in, because I think that getting overwhelmed is very, very easy as we enter this part of it. I think honestly, in the last 7 episodes that we've done, you could have gotten overwhelmed at any one of those points too. But this is where it kind of like the rubber meets the road, where we're like really starting to kind of like unearth things, and the overwhelm can creep in really quickly. And so, I love that you just kind of like framed how we can really mitigate that a little bit, at least.
Yeah. So, before we dive into the real nitty gritty here, I want to encourage anybody who's joining us live to jump in with the comments, ask questions, get live coaching from us as we are here in real time. If you are catching the replay, listening to a recording, or checking this out on Spotify or Substack as more of a podcast than video cast, please leave comments. We would love to hear from you, engage with you, and answer anything that comes up once you've had a chance to tune in with the material. Okay, Jenn, Aspen, give us just high level, like, what is this method meant to do, and what does each letter stand for?
Okay, so what I have found in working with authors for over a decade at this point is we tend to work better when we have a system where we know that there's a step and another step and another step, and it doesn't feel like this big endless forest that we're trying to navigate through, and we don't know where to begin, we don't know where to end. There's just, when it comes to marketing specifically, although this I feel like applies to so much of the book process, it can be overwhelming because the opportunities are truly endless. And so I put the Aspen method together to kind of create some kind of boundaries or container for the authors that I've been working with for the last decade. And so I've been using this internally with PYP authors for quite some time. And it wasn't until February of this year that the book actually came out so other people can benefit from it as well. And so the point in putting it together was to create some kind of repeatable process that has some like very flexible beginning, middle, and end parts to it. So, and everything builds on itself. And you can repeat this cycle as often as you would like. I say every 90 days, you might want to kind of run things through. It might be it takes you 12 months. It really depends on going back to previous episodes that we've done. It depends on your goals. It depends on how you're defining success, what your purpose is, what your goals are, how quickly or slowly you might be kind of moving through all this material. So with that said, the A in Aspen is assess. So it's really just kind of assessing the lay of the land, because in order for us to kind of do anything from there, we kind of have to know what we're starting with. So we have benchmarks. Then the S in Aspen is strategize, because now we have a little bit of the lay of the land. Now it's like, okay, how are we going to add some kind of level of strategy to what we're doing so we can be even more intentional. Intentional. That's a new word.
Intentionable.
Intentionable. I might use that somewhere. So we can have more intention for what we're doing, right? And so we have the A, the S. Now there's the P. It's planning, right? So you can assess all you want, you can strategize all you want, but without a plan, what are we doing here, right? Mm-hmm. So the planning is really actually putting the pieces and parts together, followed by the E, which is execute, because all of that previous work is meaningless unless we're actually executing upon that strategic plan that we've created while we've assessed kind of the underneath of everything. And so that's kind of like the primary chunk of it. But really what I see authors miss every single day of the week, which is where the N comes in, is the nurturing process. The N is for nurture, because we spend a lot of time, money, energy, effort, all of the things to get people into our ecosystem, to get someone to buy our book, to get them to do something. And then they do it. And then we have absolutely no plan for how we're going to maintain that relationship going forward. So nurturing is all about maintaining relationships. And so that's why if you get to that place of where you're looking at an activity that you did and you're looking at that maintaining the relationship, you can almost kind of start the process again to say, okay, now what can I do by looking at all the stuff that I've learned through going through this process once? How do I start again and reassess, re-strategize, and then kind of go on and on? So that is the high level as succinctly as I could put it.
Beautiful. Okay. So because we're breaking this down into small, pieces, right? Mm-hmm. Because we want you all to be intentionable in your approach. We're really focusing today on assess. So we are evaluating where we are. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so that assessment includes looking at the position of your book, your current marketing activities, your existing content, and doing also looking at personal brand and presence. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm like flipping through the pages here.
Competitor industry trends.
Yep. Aligning your marketing with your strengths. So that's where your SWOT analysis comes in, right? So that's a different type of framework, right? That's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Yes. So SWOT spelt with an O.
Yeah.
O for opportunities. So where should we actually, this is where I want to dive in. I want to dive in with positioning your book, because I feel like positioning is this kind of like marketing buzzword, right? That when you've been kicking around the block enough as a business owner, entrepreneur, or even in an organization, perhaps that you're working for somebody else, maybe you've heard that word when it comes to like how they want to market themselves. How do you want to position yourself within the market? And I feel like it's very jargony. And it's like, well, what does that mean exactly? Right? Now, the book covers a checklist of things to kind of make sure that you've considered or that you thought about. But I want to pull back from that checklist, and I just want to talk broadly about how you define positioning, before we talk about different things that they can be looking at as a part of the position.
Yeah, I think positioning, is really wildly encompassing of a lot of things, because it's really because again, it's under this assessing phase, right? It's really just stepping back and truly looking at the full lay of the land. It's what the whole market kind of looks like and how you fit within that market. And so if you're in a really competitive category working on a leadership book, for example, like there's a lot of leadership books out there. And so it's really kind of looking at that competitive landscape of what does leadership look like? And now what is my unique angle that fits within it? And you had mentioned the checklist that's part of the book. That is a very kind of like tactical, tangible, optical way of looking at positioning, because positioning, I think there's like things that you could feel tangible and things that are intangible, but that checklist is very much like, if I am an expert and I'm writing a book about leadership and I want to show up in a room and I want people to take me seriously, the positioning of that, a lot of that has to do with who I am and how I show up, which is how the personal branding kind of comes into it. But it's also like how the book is constructed. Was it designed properly? Was it edited well? Was it like all of these things that you and I really spend a lot of time, I think, emphasizing to authors, is that you want to really show up well. But if you have all of this kind of work that you've done around how to position yourself, and then your book is actually not done well, the production value is not done well, none of that really matters. So it's kind of like this combination of a number of different things that are all intersecting, that really is what creates what we call positioning.
So then what would you say, Jen, like, because there could be some people who are not getting to this, what we're talking about here, until after the book is already done and out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not every author is doing their marketing and their like kind of business planning and positioning strategy alongside actually developing the manuscript. So how would you suggest that they think about position if the book has already been done, they didn't think about some of those things ahead of time, and now there's like no changing whatever the book looks like? The book is the book.
I would evaluate everything then. So if I were like, it's because you can retroactively go back and do it. I think a lot of times being more strategic and intentional from the start is going to be more helpful. But as you're saying, a lot of folks, like if you don't know what you don't know, it's not your fault, right? And I think a lot of authors, for a lot of reasons, are coming from or having that experience where they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know I should do this, because the information is almost too much out there when it comes to authorship. So I would just say, spend some time evaluating, right? So this is where you can look at industry trends for whatever it is that you're kind of working on and what the areas that you're in. But then also now going back and saying, okay, when I look at my book, let me look at the top books and the top 10 books in that particular category. Let me see what they're doing and what's working for them. And let me try to understand how they might be positioning themselves, which can then help you influence what your positioning might be. So I would say it's less about thinking about what you didn't do well, but more about what you could do well in the future.
Okay.
Does that help you think?
Also leveraging things that are not necessarily the book itself, like your credibility, your profile, how many years you've been in the field, different interviews that you've done that show your authority over the topic, those types of things. So, all right. If we look at the workbook part of that, what is your book's professional positioning and how can you use it to build credibility, visibility, and influence? So you gave us the example of leadership book and leadership excellence, right? So let's just use that example and dive a little bit further. If you were to fill this out for that author, what would you say?
What is your book's professional positioning and how can you use it to build credibility, visibility, influence? I think this is where I would lean into the target audience very heavily. So that was, I believe, our June episode. I think we talked about target audiences. Because if I am a leadership expert, I am in a very saturated space. So what's really going to matter is the niche in that space that I'm in. Because from a positioning standpoint, I don't want to just walk into this conversation and say, hey, I wrote a book about leadership. That's not really it's a position in one way, because it does differentiate you from other categories, but it's still so wide and massive. So I would say my book's position is, and I don't have a leadership book specifically, but if I did, I might say something along the angle of being a purpose-driven leader. So what does being a purpose-driven leader look like? Because if I'm focused on growing leadership skills for others that are purpose driven, that's going to look different than another type of leadership book. And even within that, at PYP, we've certainly done our fair share of books that have some kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion type of lens to them. And we have a number of leadership books within that category. So same thing. It might be that your angle around leadership is developing diverse leaders. And so now that already starts to position you really differently than someone who is doing some kind of broad leadership book, and maybe they only work with Fortune 500 companies. Maybe your unique angle is that you work with those small companies that have like up to about 100 employees. Very different positioning, right? And that's where our credentials, where our personal brand, where our website, where the content that we put out, where how our book is written, where all of that kind of creates that bigger positioning in the market. It's almost like thinking about our resume too. Like how would you, which is I think the hard work, right? Like I think that's why this is part of the assessing phase, because it's hard, because sometimes, like as you're saying, like you don't even know what positioning really means. And this is where AI can come in handy, right? Like you could go to the AI that you're using right now and say, help me figure out what my professional positioning is, and then dump in your LinkedIn, your resume, your website, and just see what it might be able to help come back with. Because it's how do we use that to build our credibility, our visibility, and our influence, which is what we're trying to do as entrepreneurs and business owners anyways. We're trying to use what we do to influence others so they can have a good experience or transformation.
Yeah. Okay, so if we turn this my direction then as like the guinea pig here and like the study. So I have the two books. I have one memoir. I have the other that's the desk reference. Do not write a book until you read this one. So in terms of do not write a book until you read this one. So it's 4-time award winning. It's hybrid published. It's got a ton of advanced praise in the front from people in the field that are just adding to the credibility and merit of what's in there. The audience is really nonfiction indie authors with small businesses. People who are likely wanting to write a book that connects somehow to what they're already doing as an entrepreneur or small business owner, and are likely not interested in the traditional path to publishing, though they kind of want to understand what that would look like, or its advantages or disadvantages, just to understand the comparison. So, I mean, that's a nutshell kind of view, right? Using it to build credibility, visibility, and influence. So this is just like a recent example, but I'm trying to get more speaking engagements. And so I've added, there was one session that my co-author and I did for Independent Publishers of New England, their online virtual conference a couple of years ago that was called Do Not Write a Book Until You Attend This Session. So we just totally changed the last kind of word of the main title. It was gripping. The slide deck was branded towards the same kind of like aesthetic of the book itself. And we brought them through multiple pitfalls, which was really the premise of the book and why the book even became a thing anyway. Was Bridget and I were talking about the things we wish authors knew before they got started. So I've created a speaker kit. I've put like the topics that I can speak to. I added that one. I met with somebody this week who's running a online business summit specifically for people who want to write books. That's happening in January. And we got on an alignment call to determine which talk was going to be the most useful to her audience. And it turned out that there was a lot of people who wanted to come on and do inspirational talks about, what books can do, how books can change, inspiring stories of people who have told their story. But apparently nobody had suggested anything that was kind of like brass tacks, how to cautionary tale, whatever. So mine actually ended up standing out. My topic stood out among all the others because apparently it didn't sound like everybody else's.
It's awesome.
Which is great. So now it's like, that's kind of like its unique positioning within this one online conference, at least so far, as she's building up, who's going to speak. But now this is a chance for the book to get a little emphasis, right, through this platform. I get a little emphasis as being the author and the speaker of the material that's being presented. It gives me visibility to the audience of people, right, that she's bringing into this online summit, and hopefully it influences people to not make the mistakes that I'm trying to caution them against when it comes to writing a book.
Mm-hmm. And this goes directly back to our conversation in May about the ecosystem, because this is such a perfect example of how to extend the book's ecosystem. And I love that you just, swapped out the ending of the title, and now you have this whole presentation that still has the same provocative sound as the book does. So you're still 100% on brand with your approach too. And so I think that that's, something important to think about too, when we think about positioning, and it kind of ties into kind of the branding and personal branding side of things, is like, how do you show up? Right. And so for you, if you had some boring, drab title for something, it would absolutely not match your personality in any way. So, and then there's other people where maybe a more conservative approach works. And for them to have a provocative title, it would not work either. So I think that, like, even thinking from that level of a granular detail is thinking about like how your book's title is kind of in alignment with kind of like who you are. And in this case, how your workshop title is in alignment with who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if we think about this from a memoir perspective, because it's a totally different genre of nonfiction,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my memoir, Dear Universe, I Get It Now, is interesting because it's actually epistolary. So it's not a narrative. I mean, it's chronologically ordered, but it's not a full-on narrative structure where it's like you're getting every little kind of beat on, my personal journey. It's a book of letters that kind of like, it's a highlights reel.
Mm-hmm.
So the structure is a little bit different than some, and it blends some self-help aspects because of the questions at the end, which I'm not usually like a let's blend memoir and self-help kind of person. Like, I feel like memoir can be its own separate thing, but in this particular work, to have it land a little bit more powerfully with the reader, the suggestion had been made to add the reflection questions at the end of each chapter. So it's kind of blending a couple of genres here, but then thematically, it's also very spiritual and very personal development. It's
Mm-hmm.
about kind of like divine calling and the universe putting lessons in your path for you, not to like ruin you, but to teach you.
Mm-hmm.
So, that carves out like a specific type of people who would probably want that type of book or get something from that type of book. It's got nearly 50 reviews on Amazon. It's 8 shy of that, so 42. But
Nice.
the rating is 4.8. It's
Mm-hmm.
also won 2 awards. Um, and for me, this book is a credibility booster from a perspective of like, I feel like it would be a little bit odd, or I would feel a little bit disingenuous trying to sell helping people write memoirs if I had never done it myself. So the credibility for me here is not necessarily what I talk about in the book, but the fact that I have a book in the genre of what I'm saying I coach others on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, the book does talk about me going to get my master's of fine arts. It talks about studying
Mm-hmm.
creative writing. So I suppose
Sure.
there is some adjacent kind of credibility there if somebody spends time reading all of that,
Mm-hmm.
to recognize that I'm formally trained. Um, and it's very on brand for me in terms of like, it's kind of irreverent. It's told in a very kind of like straightforward, sassy, sarcastic, kind of
Mm-hmm.
funny kind
It's
of
very
way.
you.
It's very me, with some vulnerable moments and some
Mm-hmm.
ability to share the deep, hard stuff. For me, this is really like between the 2 books, this is the book that it's like, if you want to know who I am as a person, so that you can trust me to work with, and so that you feel
Mm-hmm.
psychologically safe in doing
Totally.
the work with me that we're about to do and getting your book out there, this is the book that you want to read, because
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to know me intimately. You'll know my whole heart. You'll know most of my story up until a certain point. And there will be no question as to who I am as a person, because there's, nothing been held back, in that body of work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of what I talk about, in my content is like being brave to begin, being brave to start your story, being brave to say the hard thing. And the subtitle of Dear Universe is Letters on the Art and Journey of Being Brave
Mm-hmm.
and Being
Yep.
Me. So there's a lot of synthesis there.
Mm-hmm.
Synthesis, synergy. Um, Between what I do, who I am, and what this book has to offer.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I want to call attention to in all of what you just said, because that is absolutely all of your positioning, is the added layer of positioning that you spoke to when you said that you wrote this because you want to have gone through the same experience of the people that you're coaching. I think that is like a layer deeper that probably should be emphasized, maybe even more than you may already be doing so. Because I think that there's so many people, and it's the same reason why I wrote my memoir. I think there's so many people who are helping authors through any part of the process who have not gone through that part of the process themselves. And so if we're thinking about the positioning and the market for it, I think you leading with the fact that that is one of the reasons why you did this is to have that same deep level of intimacy, the vulnerability, the terrifying moments of it, like all the whole emotional roller coaster of what it takes to put out a memoir. That is a really big, I think, positioning point here. Because as you said, like the story does then kind of lend itself to your credibility throughout as well. And when it comes to the work that you do, I think even a little bit more than mine, is it is a really vulnerable emotional process to help somebody write a book. And so if they can know a lot more about you and have more multi-dimensional view of who you are, not just how you're showing up as a, flat person on Zoom, I think that really matters.
Yeah, I received that. I hadn't really thought about that. And yeah, that's not something that I spend a lot of time talking about in content.
Because it really is a huge differentiator. Huge.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of other, workbook prompts in here, but the one that stood out to me the next, that I thought would be really good for kind of doing some live talking around, since I think, the question of where are you showing up and where are you invisible, which is basically like, okay, well, where are you and where aren't you? I think people can figure that one out. What content are you sitting on that you haven't yet leveraged? I feel like that's a pretty self-explanatory question. Adjectives that best describe your brand. I had a hard time narrowing it down to 3, but I think that question is a good question for people to sit and reflect with and have an understanding of how they see themselves, and then is that also the way that others see them? But the one that I thought would be worth really having some discussion around was this next one. What competitor or industry trends do you see in your niche, and how could you focus your marketing efforts on positioning yourself in those spaces to provide valuable insights and engage your audience? Again, obviously this is like another part of this positioning piece. But I think what happens sometimes with authors, they have this like full book of content. They're an expert in their field. They take it a little bit for granted because they've been there forever. And so they can't check their blind spots. I feel like this question is like putting pressure on like a blind spot to like, like you've still got your finger on the pulse of what's happening around you that you could actually use to your advantage. So for me, I thought about this through the lens of memoir because these are the things that like came up the fastest, was like the idea that memoirs are only for politicians and celebrities. Like that's all we want to hear from. That's all we want to publish, which I think is more of a traditional publisher's perspective. But even so, I was on a panel recently where somebody was like, for my people who want to write a memoir, I suggest that they try to turn them into self-help and prescriptive so that they're easier to sell. And that like really bothers me.
I agree.
Which is kind of adjacent to like only write a memoir if you're somebody that's worth hearing from.
Which is nonsense.
Which is nonsense, because there's a lot of politicians and celebrities that I do not give a damn to hear their opinion or their life story or anything. Memoir is a dying genre, was another one that came to mind. So how do you see then turning those things into marketing efforts?
So using you specifically as an example, I would say, so thinking about all the things that you just said about memoir, right? Like you and I have been hearing these things for a while now, especially on the traditional side of things, because their focus is if they can't sell it, then your story has no meaning or merit or value, which is BS. We both know this. So if we look at the idea that memoir is dying, that no one cares about your story, this, that, and the other. Your position, your angle, which is already kind of how your book is anyway, is almost, and I don't want to say a contrarian because it's not a contrarian, but it's almost like both of our books, I think, are contrarians to the way that the industry operates. Like you and I operate differently than the industry operates, in that the industry only cares about sales, only cares about people with big platforms, only cares about some salacious story that they think that they can get a movie deal or documentary or whatever the things are. And you and I both know, and obviously there's a ton of other people in our industry who are incredible humans who we are aligned with on this. But broadly speaking, this industry is incredibly predatory and incredibly going after first-time authors that just do not know what they're doing, and either crushing their dreams by telling them that their story is meaningless, or the opposite, in inflating their ego and saying, oh my God, this is amazing, and then taking them for all their money. Either direction is not helpful. And so I think where you fit into all of this is the honest, no bullshit, straight up approach where you will sit down with somebody and say, your story is valuable. Let's find a way to make it something that people want to read. It's not necessarily something that will sell. It's something that people want to read. And if something is something that people want to read, then it will inherently sell. So like, it's kind of like reframing it. So I almost think that like just your entire essence and being and the way that both of your books are written already are kind of like in opposite of these trends that are showing these negative things, and you're already reframing them as a positive thing. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? And does that resonate?
So let's go back then to the leadership example. This is obviously this made up hypothetical situation, but given that we both work with a lot of leaders or people that are writing kind of nonfiction in the leadership space or, you know, self-development space, you know, what might you suggest to them in terms of a competitor industry trend, you know, that could then lend itself to some further marketing effort?
I think it still goes back to the niche markets. I really think that that's where it comes in, because if we look at the same kind of idea of like, no one's buying memoir, right? Which we know is not true. Or no one's buying DEI books. We also know that's not true. It's the same type of idea, right? So if you're someone who is developing diverse talent and diverse leaders, you could be hearing or seeing others saying, these books aren't selling, because Lord knows there's not a traditional publisher anywhere that would take anything remotely close to a DEI book right now. Like that is just a hard no. But there's a lot of hybrid publishers and a lot of people who are self-publishing services who will absolutely help support that initiative if it's aligned with their values. So it's kind of looking at it and saying, here's a trend that I'm seeing, but how am I adapting with that trend? And so if it's a leadership book that has some kind of DEI component to it, the trends are not looking great right now. I know a lot of people personally who have, you know, just given up that consulting side of their business because it's just not profitable right now because of just the way things are shaking out. They could follow that same trend and say there's no market, there's no value for this book. Or they could say, you know what, maybe they're not hiring my consulting services right now, but they still need this information to do the work more quietly behind the scenes. And so it's a matter of like, how will you position yourself in that particular way? Because I know, like if we think about just kind of any, it's just, this is an easy one for me to speak to, but like if we're looking at like diverse markets, it's so easy to broaden from there, right? You could say like, I focus on, you know, cultivating diverse leadership. Great. But then when shit gets bad, you can still be marketing to the people who are already, you're speaking to the, you know, singing to the choir, while also broadening your, hey, I can help any leader. I can, you know, and you could still even be niche in that, where maybe it's not diverse leaders, where we're thinking about maybe race related, but you can say, I work with women leaders, which is a little more broad and might get access to other opportunities. And so the positioning is the most important thing here. And it comes down to like, what does your website copy say? What is your, like, what's in the actual content of your book? When you're soliciting people or trying to pitch somebody, what are you saying and what words are you using? And how are you doing it authentically as you versus the alternative, right? Because again, like there could be two other people who, one with a hybrid publishing company, one as a ghostwriter and writing coach helping memoir writers, and have completely different conversations. Like you and I are unscripted, we're off the cuff, we're both sarcastic, we're both kind of just like say it how it is. And there's a lot of people who kind of pussyfoot around all of that stuff. But someone's going to be attracted to our style versus someone else's style or their style and not our style. And all of that is all the positioning that matters. Like it's such a big, broad word that encompasses so much.
I'm glad that you used a relevant example though, because I think that there are a lot of people who are like, what do I do in a climate and in a world where my ideas are automatically discredited or ruled out because of X, Y, or Z? I mean, I think that we've gone through different periods of history where that has been true. And I think even when we've had better political climates, there are still groups of people that probably feel that way, right?
Yeah, of
Like,
course.
I can't be heard, I'm not being seen, I'm invisible, whatever it is. Um, you know, I think it's interesting because there's like the trying to position yourself so you're more palatable, but then do you then feel like you're selling yourself out by trying to be more palatable, by not really saying what you mean because you're feeling like you've got to say it a certain way in order for it to be heard? And I think, this is more of a philosophical question, I think, than it is a marketing question. I think that you have to kind of know what you're willing to do.
Yeah.
You have to know what your line is. If it feels like selling out to you, then maybe that's not the way that you go. If it feels like the right approach because you're like, hey, getting them to try to hear me and see my point is more important than the way I come across, then maybe you choose how to soften your angle or soften your approach in what you're saying so that you hopefully can be heard in the audience that you're trying to reach. But I think that this is like an individual kind of quest where you
Yeah.
have to decide who are you going to be and how you're going to be in these spaces right now. And I have to imagine that there's a lot of delicacy here because, it can be dangerous in some spaces to be a particular voice, because of the identities that are attached with that voice and whether or not those groups are open and safe spaces to be naturally yourself. So, it's a hard time to be people.
It's a hard time to be an author. It's always a hard time to be an author because as an author, you're putting the spotlight on yourself. You're putting it on your story, on your frameworks, your lived experiences, and it's always exposing. And then there's other times where it's even more exposing. And I think this is why, and I was trying to flip through the book quickly to find where I write about this. I do not know what chapter it's in, but the idea of either doubling down on your story or watering down. Like you have to pick a lane. Like at least in the current climate that we're in, you have to pick a lane. There's no like room for middle ground. It's either water it down, go broader, or double down and go really narrow, because you will find your people in either of those camps. And if we think about just all of the pre-work that we did to get to this conversation about assessing and thinking about this is why that pre-work matters. Because if you do that foundational work in those first 7 months that we've been talking about this, the decision to double down or water down is going to be much more clear. You're going to have a much better sense of what really matters to me, what are my goals, and how am I going to show up to support those.
And I think that this also goes back to why, like, understanding your why and your motivation, again, one of the principles that you and I talk about, I think almost every season, is important because that's your anchor point. If you're having to make a decision about watering down or doubling down, right, you need to go back to why did you get on this journey to begin with? What were you hoping to achieve? What was your mission? What were you trying to do for you and for your reader and for your little corner of the world? And that is kind of the filter at which you need to go and say, okay, to get to that end goal, I need to do X, Y, or Z. Obviously, the political climate, the culture, like where you're at is also another filtration point. I'm not saying discredit it. But like going back to your original intention, then also serves as a guidepost as well, right? And probably a path is somewhere there between that filtration point and this other one.
And if we're thinking about the optics and again the positioning and all of that, it's also if we're like analyzing competitors and industry trends and things like that, going back in time, figuring out whatever period of time to look at to say, okay, it is 2026 that we're having this conversation. What did this conversation look like in 2021? What did this look like in 2016? What did it look like in 1990s? Whatever the time period makes sense for you to be looking at, because the things that feel like problems now might actually not be problems, and they might be a huge benefit if you're looking at a comparative window over time. And that's where we can start to really see what trends look like. And I can give you a really specific example of my consulting work prior to being an author. My first few books were LGBTQ specific books for financial advisors, insurance agents, people in very like selling services and product, like very like sales mode of how to communicate with this audience. Like it really, to me, it did not seem like rocket science. And I still don't think it is, but that type of book just didn't exist in 2013 and 2012. So like I was the one that was putting the book out there, and there were maybe 5 books total that had anything to do with LGBTQ people, and I knew all the people who wrote the books, right? And so my problem then was just there was no awareness, there was no market for it, right? So I had to kind of like pave my own path and my own trail with this content that nobody was interested in except for the clients that I was working with. I had Fortune clients that were like my bread and butter, and I was writing the books for their people basically. Versus now, if I were going back and doing those same books, the marketing, the entirety would be so much easier, even though it would look like optically that it'd be more difficult now, given the politics of now versus 10 years ago, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's a good example.
Mm-hmm. So all perspective, a lot of this is perspective and like really just trying to look from all directions that we're not thinking, back to your point, blind spots, right? It's all about blind spots.
Yeah. But, and again, I think the one thing that we haven't really touched on here, well, we've touched on it broadly, and so I just want to kind of bring it back around, is just like you all, like through all of this, right? Yes, the political climate, right? That's like a big macro level kind of, thing to consider, right? Then there's like you and your why and like what your intention was, but we're forgetting kind of like the most important factor here, right? Which is your reader, right? Mm-hmm. Where does your reader fall in these camps, and where are they hanging out, and what's going to appeal to them, right? We are not in the business of trying to get everyone on board with our book. We are in the business of getting the one that we need to get on board with our book. So where is that one falling on the line of all of these things? Are they going to appreciate you watering down or doubling down? Are they going to appreciate you coming up, up front to like face the thing, and be direct? Or are they going to appreciate that you're more diplomatic in your approach, right? I mean, that's kind of maybe more in your topic areas that would create a lot of like strong response, right now. Clearly there's a lot of other things that might be a little bit more, safer, for lack of a better word, where your approach is just your approach. I don't know that, unless there's like a leadership book that's like why we should ignore DEI in the workplace, I can imagine that getting some heat. But like generally speaking, the books that I tend to see are like about being a better leader. So those are probably still on the safe, the fly list. So again, it's like, it's topic, it's audience, it's how those things intersect with your identities, how it intersects with your readers' identities, how it intersects with current climate, where you're hanging out, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to say. And this is why I said and prefaced in the very beginning of this episode, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Because there's so many decision levers to pull when it comes to marketing and promotion, that you might not be able to just sit down one day and cleanly assess, strategize, plan, execute, and nurture, because there's so many things to do here, right? But I think that assessing, right, to just like basically take the pause, take the beat, and understand where you're at, what your baseline is a great way to just get your mind centered around where you are currently, to be present with where you are, and to analyze and evaluate from a place of no judgment. Like it's data, right? This is what I have done so far. This is where I'm at today, and when you're doing that SWOT analysis, which is like the last piece of this workbook section for chapter 8, right? Doing that with objectivity, not judgment. Like, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. Everybody's got them. The end. Weaknesses can be turned into strengths. Weaknesses can be the things where you just know now to focus on. You know, it's
Mhm.
growth, it's not failure.
Yeah.
Opportunities doesn't mean that you skipped out. It means that there are other things that you could be doing that you haven't done yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and threats, right? Like this is more of an understanding of obstacles, not like threats.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, we hope that threats doesn't mean
Yeah.
actual safety issues to your person. Um,
Yeah.
so what else to say? Because we're already coming to the top of the hour.
There's so much to still unpack, but we have a question from Jennifer Ryan on LinkedIn,
Yeah,
which is
Jennifer
a
Ryan.
yes, which is a wonderful
I
question. And
didn't
it,
see anything on my end. It's like I didn't even know anybody was here. Oh no,
where-
there she is.
yep, there she is. It says, do you find that this decision between doubling down and watering down is something an author can decide on their own, or is it better to find a trusted person or group to see this from multiple angles? Which I think is a really good question.
This is a great question. I think it's both.
I agree. I'm curious what your initial
Shocker. We align on our
what
answer. I
again?
am just so
Yes.
surprised. Okay, I'm gonna put my my theatrics aside.
It was a nice little show.
I think so. I think that first you have to know where you fall on the line or what your inclination is before you bring in other voices. I really think that the author is always the author, meaning they are the authority on decisions for their book, right? This is why I talk about in Do Not Write a Book Until You Read This One. I talk about being the CEO of your book, right? So I think that the author has to have an understanding or inclination of which direction feels the best to them and aligns the best with them. However, I also believe that all of us have an unconscious bias of like any number of things. I'm not just talking about like towards other people. Like we have unconscious bias of perspective. And so that is where I think, yes, check in with yourself, know what you think your inclination is. But I think it's really useful to have like a personal board of trustees or an
Mhm.
advisory board to check yourself against, again, for blind spots, because the whole
Mhm.
reason we have blind spots is that we can't see them. So,
Yeah.
that's where other people, would be helpful. I think it's important that the group of people be people that truly would be honest and upfront in their
Mhm.
reflection. I also think depending on what you're really truly discussing, it's worth thinking about who's in that group.
Mhm.
So for example, if it's a book that's like a little bit more geared towards a particular marginalized group or a DEI space or something like that, right? Like your personal advisory board of, let's say, all white cis people, I
Mhm.
mean, they're all going to come from that particular lens. And even if they're the most woke, conscious, supporters of DEI, they don't have the lived experiences of perhaps, whatever it is that you're talking about
Mhm.
in this book. So
Yeah.
you have to understand, like, if your group is representative of the question you're trying
Mhm.
to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because I think it's a matter of thinking about, like, for me, the vetting mechanism that I always have. And, when things were, it's been unsettled for a while now, right? And when I was thinking, because I think it was in January, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like this year has been a little bit of a blur, but I think it was in January. I had posted an article on Medium through some publication that was asking this exact question, like, do you double down or do you water down? And for me, if I think through what that looks like, I think about, if I water down what I'm doing, am I creating an unintentional rupture with the people that I've previously served?
Hmm.
Or if I double down on what I'm doing, am I going to be upsetting somebody else down the road? And so for me, I think about the community that I've built with PYP, right? Like our authors, every single author I talk to as a potential person to bring in, I think about, how will they feel in the room that I have created? A virtual room, physical room, whatever the room is. How will they feel in that room? Will they feel comfortable? Is this their people? Will they feel supported? Will they feel safe? right? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, please, or will they help create that sense of safety that I've worked really freaking hard to build? And so for me, doubling down was the only obvious solution, because if I water down, I'm now opening the door a little bit further for people who may not have that direct aligned values that I'm looking for, to create that space of safety for others. Because as we've been talking about throughout this entire time we've been doing the show, is that this process is emotional. It brings up all of the things. And so we need to be able to, even if we're not writing about something emotional, we need to be able to come to a space and be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm writing this leadership book about this particular thing, and I'm feeling really vulnerable right now because I can't figure out how to do XYZ. It doesn't have to be that you had some really traumatic history or story. It could just be that you're just feeling stuck in this process. And that container of safety, I think, matters across the board. So for me, that's how I think about it. So I would kind of think about, Jenn, I would kind of think about like, where or what circles are you showing up in, and how might you doubling down cause inadvertent problems, or how might you watering down create new problems or create new opportunities in either direction, right? Because it's almost like it's either going to create friction or it's going to create an opportunity, and just kind of weighing the pros and cons of both. And then to Allie's point about finding trusted people, I think it's got to be the right people. Because I did have conversations when I was thinking about like, okay, is there a moment here that PYP has to kind of shift how we're talking about things? And after talking with people who I trust, who are kind of like really thinking about it from the same perspective, I'm like, yeah, no. Like, and I had people say, you might want to kind of like tone it down, like focus more on purpose, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing, because it's a disservice to everybody else that came before if I just stopped doing it the way I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So much. There's so much to unpack.
There really is so much to unpack there. Jennifer, let us know if that was helpful or only made you more confused.
And you're welcome to shoot me an email and we can chat in more detail if you'd like.
Yes. And I think we also have some time coming up, so we could also dive into that then as well.
It's always nice when we have humans that we know who join and ask questions.
That I know, and I especially love this human. And people, this is why you need to show up live, so you can get our love, you can get our direct response, and you can get all of our answers. We will take them also, of course, if you watch this in replay mode.
Yep,
so
sure
don't think that we won't send you love then too. But it is a lot of fun when you show up live for these exact reasons, because then we can just pal around with really juicy questions and see what comes out of those conversations.
We need to get Christy back in here. She always asks good questions.
I know.
I'm going to poke her.
All right. So Christy, if you catch us in a replay, shout out to you. All right. So that brings us to the top of the hour. That went so fast, which I know it always does. So we are going to be coming back at you in September with our next episode of Unscripted with Allie and Jenn for the promotion season. We're going to be talking about chapter 9, which was the one that I named earlier inaccurately. Strategize your visibility and audience growth. So we're going into the S portion of the ASPEN method. Remember, go to unscriptedforauthors.com and make sure you download the free workbook and check out our previous episodes. Catch up, join us, learn all the things. And before we get going and we jump off, Jenn, what do you want to shamelessly promote before we leave?
I am going to shamelessly promote the Institute for Author Growth and Impact. So if you are struggling with the writing, the publishing, the marketing, any aspect of the book at all, please go check it out. The focus is community building, giving you a place to come and ask the questions that are on your mind, weekly accountability support. So it's the whole package, and I'm very excited about that. And then in September, I will be announcing officially our State of Author Marketing Survey that will be coming out. So if anyone is interested in participating in it, please shoot me a message on whatever platform. I don't know the link off the top of my head. Otherwise, I would just flat out say it right now. But it is actively open, and I'm very excited about that. So maybe that'll be something we talk about in 2027. We can unpack like the findings of all of this goodness.
Actually, speaking of that, what would be really great is to hear from all of you what you would want to hear about in 2027.
Yeah, we don't have a plan. Shocking.
We don't have a plan at this point. I think this is roughly the time last year that we came up with our plan for 2026.
Yep.
And it was very fitting that Jenn's book, Promote Your Purpose, just happened to be coming out and was going to make for a fabulous kickoff to the new year. And it had exactly 12 chapters.
Mhm.
So fancy that.
Yeah. Let
Um,
us know.
so, yeah, we would love to hear from you about maybe what you would want 2027 to focus on as you're thinking about those books. This is usually the time that people are like, I didn't get to it this year. I'm thinking about it for next year. So, what would those conversations look like? What would you want to hear from us? Or are there guest experts or conversations you would want us to bring in other people to have? We would love to know. So, Jenn, do we have an email on unscriptedforauthors.com that they can write to?
I don't think so, but that might be something we should look into.
Okay,
It's only
so
been 3 years of
this
doing the
story
show.
is write to one of us privately if you've got that kind of scoop or insight. We would love to hear from you. I'm just going to simply shamelessly promote the 30-minute story stroll. These are a free 30-minute call with me. It's a great way to start the conversation. Pick an expert's brain, figure out what your next best move is. And of course, if you're interested in learning to work with me, I can tell you a little bit more about what I offer there. But honestly, I just want to get conversations started with fabulous folks who have books on their minds and hearts and are ready to take action.
I love it. I think your story stroll is an obvious no-brainer for a variety of reasons. So
I think so
highly,
too.
highly
I think
recommend.
so too, but
Mhm.
that's, I'm biased on that one.
You know, we all are.
We all are. And
Um,
so with that, we're going to leave you, my friends, until next time, and stick around to bounce around to our
yes.
outro.
All right. Thanks,
Yep.
Allie.
Bye.